This video contains flashing lights and colors.
At Disney's Hollywood Studios in Florida, Rock 'n' Roller Coaster, as we know it, closed down in March of 2026. For almost 30 years, this attraction operated as Rock 'n' Roller Coaster Starring Aerosmith and featured the music of that world-famous rock band. The ride will soon be rethemed to the Muppets. Though its history has been told quite a few times, there are a few aspects that aren't often brought up. For this video, we'll touch on those as well as the numerous controversies surrounding the ride. Though the coaster itself will reopen, the Aerosmith experience undoubtedly left a huge impact on the Disney World resort. So with that said, let's get into the full story of Rock 'n' Roller Coaster as well as its ups and downs right here on Theme Park Crazy. When Disney's Hollywood Studios first opened on May 1st, 1989, it had a pretty big problem fresh out of the gate. Then known as Disney MGM Studios, the park was partially built as an attempt to get ahead of Universal Studios Florida before the latter park's opening. Originally intended to be a simple studio tour, former Disney CEO Michael Eisner wanted to turn the concept into a full-fledged theme park. This was so he could compete with what Universal was constructing. However, this arguably led to a rushed product, and when the park finally opened, it was criticized as feeling incomplete. Believe it or not, there were only 4 attractions at MGM Studios when it first opened, and only 2 of them were rides. Those rides were the Great Movie Ride and the Studio Backlot Tour. Though both of these rides had a decent length, the number of attractions simply paled in comparison to the Magic Kingdom and Epcot at the time. Eisner could tell this was a pretty big issue right away. To respond to the criticism, he immediately sought to add more major attractions to the park as soon as possible. Supposedly, this push involved expediting the construction of the park's Star Tours attraction, allowing it to open months ahead of schedule in December 1989. Over the next few years, park officials planned the next big phase, which would be an expansion named and themed to Sunset Boulevard. The new land would include the world-famous Twilight Zone Tower of Terror drop ride. The attraction was a huge success, but guests of the 90s were still hungry for more thrill rides. Some sources say Rock 'n' Roller Coaster was initially planned to open alongside Tower of Terror, but was delayed due to the financial failure of the Euro Disney project. However, former Imagineer Jim Shull says the project actually came together in a different way. According to Shull, the idea grew from an apparent gap in the park's attractions, not only in regards to thrill rides, but something else. When MGM Studios first opened, it leaned heavily into behind-the-scenes filmmaking and education. But again, guests quickly made it clear they wanted more rides. At the same time, Imagineers noticed something strange about the park's parking lot. There were segments labeled film, television, and stage, and there was also a music section. This was despite the park not having any true music-based attractions. What really inspired them was the recent success of the souped-up Space Mountain attraction at Disneyland Paris. They loved the idea of a launch coaster with onboard audio, but they couldn't simply clone the coaster when Disney World already had a Space Mountain. Instead, the project evolved into something more fitting of the park. Imagineers also got a chance to check out Outer Limits Flight of Fear at Ohio's Kings Island. Though it didn't have onboard audio, it had something Paris's Space Mountain didn't, a pre-show. This pre-show, which was meant to resemble a government website, was praised by Shull and the rest of his team. It was soon decided that the coaster would have a pre-show too. As for what the ride would be called, Imagineers came up with the name Rock 'n' Roller Coaster in a meeting. It sounded great, it was catchy, and it rolled off the tongue. Unfortunately though, they quickly found out that Universal Studios already had a claim on that name. According to Shull, there was a lot of back and forth over whether or not Disney could get the name for their own attraction. Fortunately though, Universal had not used the name for any of their attractions, and their right to use it would end up expiring. However, there was another problem. Shull did some research and found out that the now-defunct Opryland in Nashville, Tennessee also had an attraction named Rock 'n' Roller Coaster. Albeit, this was a coaster that was far smaller and slower than what the proposed ride would be. Fortunately for Disney though, Opryland would close permanently at the end of 1997. This meant that Disney was easily able to acquire the name from Opryland's owners, Gaylord Entertainment. Shell believes that if Opryland hadn't closed when it did, Rock and Roller Coaster would have been named something else. Eventually, development would begin on the attraction, but there was yet another major hurdle. Officials had to figure out whose music would be featured on the attraction. Though one of the initial ideas was said to involve a medley of different rock tunes, Disney's alleged first choice was one band in particular. That band was the Rolling Stones. Though the exact details differ depending on who's telling the story, the Stones were reportedly on board with the project. The only problem was the amount of money they were asking for. According to multiple sources, the band was asking for an annual fee of $10 million to feature their music on the attraction. To be fair, other sources say it was just $10 million total, but it was clear in any case that Disney didn't want to pay that asking price. So with that, Disney was said to look at two other acts. Next on the docket was apparently the famous rock band Kiss. However, Kiss reportedly wanted even more money than the Rolling Stones did. This isn't surprising, as Kiss is more of a brand than the Rolling Stones, and just look at all of the merchandise they've had over the years. Hell, they even did a crossover with Sanrio for Hello Kitty-themed Kiss toilet paper. Disney's third choice was said to be U2, who reportedly declined the offer. Options were running out, but soon enough, Disney came across a band with the perfect price. Boston-based rock group Aerosmith, led by musician Steven Tyler. Though they had been around since the 1970s, Aerosmith had recently seen a resurgence in popularity in the 90s. Their albums Get a Grip and 9 Lives hit #1 on the Billboard Albums chart. This recent popularity revival, plus their asking price being lower than the Stones, was said to make them the perfect fit for the attraction. Perhaps uncoincidentally enough, production was also underway for the 1998 Michael Bay film Armageddon. This was to be released by Disney through their Touchstone division. The film's development involved working with Aerosmith on the song Don't Wanna Miss a Thing. Funnily enough, Tyler's daughter Liv would also have a major acting role in the film. Although critics took aim at what they called a nonsensical melodramatic plot, audiences devoured the film like a slice of red velvet cheesecake topped with Cool Whip. It was an enormous hit, grossing over $500 million worldwide with a $140 million budget. Aerosmith's song would hit the #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100, the first ever for the group. At this point, their popularity was pretty much at an all-time high just months away from the ride's debut. As for the ride itself, it would be a first-of-its-kind launched roller coaster by Dutch manufacturer Vekoma. At the time, Vekoma was mostly known for their compact boomerang shuttle coasters and cookie-cutter suspended looping coasters, or SLCs for short. For this project, Vekoma would attempt something they had never done before. More specifically, this coaster would use a state-of-the-art linear synchronous motor, or LSM, technology. With this system, a series of electromagnets would activate at just the right moment, propelling the train from 0 to 57 miles per hour in just 2.8 seconds. The ride's layout would feature 3 inversions, a top height of 80 feet, and a G-force of 5.0. After months of construction and cast member previews, the coaster would finally make its grand debut on July 29, 1999. The ride experience went as followed. Upon arriving at the coaster, guests passed under an inverted limousine riding on the strings of a guitar. This led to the iconic red guitar facade. According to Jim Shell, early concepts only featured a guitar on a billboard, but Imagineers realized the idea needed to be more physically striking. The guitar on the billboard was eventually transformed into a massive 3-dimensional structure that would serve as the attraction's visual centerpiece. To help design it, Shell recalled going to Guitar Center and purchasing 2 brand spanking new red Fender Stratocaster guitars, using Disney Imagineering's credit card, of course. And by the way, that's Stratocaster, not Stratocoaster. One was brought back to the design team as a reference model, while the other one was actually taken apart and studied so the team could get an idea of what the final structure would look like. Of course, they probably didn't smash it like in this footage, but I'll take what reference videos I can get. The indoor queue was themed to the fictional record label G-Force Records. Throughout the course of the line, various displays helped set the tone. First off, a circular room displayed posters of musicians from Disney's own Hollywood Records. Further down, there was a small exhibit of recording equipment behind a glass window. Eventually, guests would be separated into groups and entered Studio C. This room had a mock recording studio where the pre-show would play. Here, a high-quality projection showed Aerosmith in the middle of working on an instrumental version of Walk This Way with a sound engineer. Instead of just showing the band on a screen, the screen was located in a room with physical objects, giving the illusion the band was actually there. When the ride first opened, there was a segment where a live cast member would grab Joe Perry's guitar for him. This was eventually removed from the pre-show, but it was re-added at a later point. Believe it or not, this illusion was so convincing that there are actually stories of park guests thinking Aerosmith was actually there, or lookalikes at least. In one cast member confessional, a woman went up to a cast member after getting off the ride and asked where the Aerosmith meet and greet was. Soon enough, the band's manager entered and informed them they were running late for a concert across town. Steven Tyler, however, didn't want to leave the fans behind, and he suggested taking them along. At one point, a cast member chimed in by saying, "Hey Steven, how about some backstage passes?" Tyler agrees, and the band convinces their manager to bring the fans along and give them backstage passes. Desiring a high-speed, high-capacity vehicle, the manager orders a super stretch limousine, which would serve as the vehicle for the ride. After the pre-show, the line continued, with guests exiting the studio and boarding their super stretch limo. From this part of the queue, you could see the other trains ahead of you being launched. This allowed those with lower intensity thresholds to exit the line if they thought the launch looked too frightening. After boarding, guests exit the station and approach the launch platform. But instead of launching right away, the ride kept guests in suspense as they waited. A highway sign flashed humorous messages to pass the time. Soon enough, Steven Tyler could be heard counting down from 5. Just as he got to 1, the red light above turned green and the train was launched forwards. Right off the bat, guests were sent upwards into a large double inverting element known as a sea serpent roll. This was the first element of its kind ever constructed, with the second being on Medusa at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom in California. Along the course were several lit-up road signs, signifying a race down the freeway to Aerosmith's concert. Further down the course is a classic corkscrew inversion, a much more common element. In addition to a camelback hill and several bank turns, there was also a track segment that went through an iconic donut sign. Now, the ride was already an excellent emulation of zooming down the freeway at night, but what really made it memorable was the onboard audio. Much like on Paris's Space Mountain, each seat came with its own set of speakers in order for guests to properly hear the soundtrack over the coaster's noise. In the case of Rock and Roller Coaster, each guest was surrounded by 5 speakers, 2 tweeters, 2 mid-range speakers, and a subwoofer underneath the seats. In particular, subwoofers are meant to handle deep bass sounds, so you could literally feel the bass rumble underneath you. In total, the coaster had 6 trains, with 5 being able to operate at the same time. A 6th train was always held on standby for maintenance reasons. This latter train would be worked on, which allowed the trains to be rotated out after a certain amount of laps. This ensured maximum efficiency and capacity. Out of the 5 trains on the track, each one was given a rotatable license plate that corresponded with which song or songs would play. One Quick Limo played 9 Lives, You Go Babe played Walk This Way and Love in an Elevator, Bye-Bye played Young Lust, Fine, and Love in an Elevator, Hate Traffic played Back in the Saddle and Dude Looks Like a Lady, and Too Fast for You played a live version of Sweet Emotion. For Love in an Elevator, Aerosmith recorded a bonus line at the very end of the song where they sang Love in a Roller Coaster. At last, guests arrived at the concert's VIP area. And who could forget the lights or those fake trees on the side? After exiting the vehicle, guests made their way to a large gift shop where they could buy their on-ride photo as well as all sorts of merchandise. If you were a kid when you rode this, you might remember the buckets full of drumsticks that you would either swing around or pretend were magic wands. All in all, this ride was an instant hit among the public. On the coaster's grand opening, Aerosmith themselves attended a dedication ceremony and were said to be huge fans of the coaster. Reportedly, Steven Tyler and guitarist Joe Perry loved the ride so much that they rode it 12 times in a row. Its high intensity, enhanced indoor sensation, and ingenious use of onboard audio quickly made it a guest favorite. Vekoma had truly struck gold with this creation, and eventually, 2 more renditions of the coaster would open over the next few years. The first was, surprisingly, not built at a Disney park, but at the Netherlands Six Flags Holland, now known as Walibi Holland. In the year 2000, the park debuted an all-new outdoor coaster named Superman the Ride. Now known as Express Platform 13, this coaster was almost exactly identical to Rock 'n' Roller Coaster with only one major difference. On Rock 'n' Roller Coaster, there is a mid-course brake run between the Sea Serpent Roll and the Corkscrew, but there are no brakes on this part of Express Platform 13. In 2002, a more direct clone of Rock 'n' Roller Coaster opened at Walt Disney Studios Park at the Disneyland Paris Resort. But despite the coaster itself having the same layout, the ride experience did have some major differences. First, there was an all-new pre-show featuring Aerosmith. Instead of being late for a concert, the band was working with engineers on a new immersive musical experience involving a roller coaster. The vehicles were not limousines, but were known as soundtrackers. Finally, rather than speeding down a freeway, you navigated a surreal light show with truss structures, as well as rigs and smoke machines that surrounded the track. It felt like you were on stage at a concert instead of being on your way to a concert. Some actually considered it to be an improvement over the Florida version's 2D scenery. Indeed, whether it was in Florida or France, Rock 'n' Roller Coaster got high marks from passengers. With that said though, there was some controversy surrounding the ride over the years. This involved the band it was based on, the licensing, and the eventual replacements. First, there was the iconic red guitar at the entrance. This featured the ride's full name, and for a while, it had branding for its sponsor, underwear brand Hanes. The big issue here was the band's name being on the guitar. This created a licensing issue once Disney introduced PhotoPass in 2004. Essentially, PhotoPass was a service that allowed guests to get their photos at different areas in the park by photographers hired by Disney. This allowed for high-quality shots with the whole family. And this was especially useful in a time before pretty much everybody had smartphones. However, there was a big issue. Aerosmith retained the rights to their name, which meant that any commercial use of it would require Disney to pay royalty fees. That included PhotoPass images taken in front of the ride's entrance if the Aerosmith name was clearly visible. The way Aerosmith saw it, if guests purchased a photo with their band name on it, the band was entitled to royalties. Disney, however, didn't want to constantly pay these fees and run into legal issues when tons of photos were being taken every day. As a result, PhotoPass photographers were instructed to avoid getting the band's name in any photographs they took. This often meant asking people to move slightly left or right, sometimes multiple times, to ensure the name was obscured. So if you remember a photographer being especially particular about your positioning, this is why, to avoid a royalty fee. Beyond the ride's entrance, there was the controversy surrounding the pre-show. For nearly 2 decades, the pre-show featured Steven Tyler making a quick hand gesture during the moment when the idea of backstage passes is brought up. For a long time, most guests either didn't notice it or didn't think much of it. As it turned out, this gesture, commonly known as the shocker, was considered to be crude and offensive. Due to Google's policies, I can't explain what the gesture represents on YouTube, but I guess that's what Wikipedia is for. In 2016, Disney finally took notice and quietly updated the pre-show. With the use of digital editing and CGI, Disney changed the gesture to an open hand. A few years after this change, an even bigger one was announced for the version in Paris, and this change also ended up causing controversy. In 2019, the Paris version of Rock 'n' Roller Coaster closed as part of a major development at the Walt Disney Studios Park. The attraction was set to become part of the park's new Marvel-themed land, Avengers Campus. The Aerosmith theme would be removed in exchange for one based on the Avengers. In 2022, the coaster reopened as Avengers Assemble Flight Force, and initial expectations were high. Unfortunately though, the retheme received a pretty negative reception. Despite a solid new animatronic of Iron Man, the theming was considered to be vastly inferior. The new storyline placed guests on a mission led by Iron Man and Captain Marvel where they must stop a barrage of alien missiles before they hit Earth. The story sounded like something a corporate executive half asleep at his desk would come up with. Worse, many guests found the narrative thin and difficult to follow. Once the ride begins, much of the experience takes place in near darkness. There are still projections and some lighting effects, but they paled in comparison to the original attraction. The onboard audio was also nerfed. The original soundtrack was replaced with a more standard Marvel-style score, not much different than what you find on a stock music website. Although you can hear the dialogue, it's still hard to tell what exactly is going on. Realistically, the plot could be about Iron Man looking for a restroom after eating some bad coleslaw, and you would still hardly be able to tell the difference. Now, the coaster system itself remains largely unchanged, with the launch, inversions, and overall intensity still considered strong. However, for many ride fans, this retheme was a half-assed missed opportunity. Not a bad ride, but a bad Disney ride. A few years after this change, the attraction found itself tied to an entirely different kind of controversy. Now, this next part does have some pretty heavy subject matter, so I will keep it brief and avoid being exploitative about it. In the early 2020s, Steven Tyler was officially named in a lawsuit related to claims of misconduct in the 1970s. This involved a 16-year-old girl he was allegedly involved with romantically from a position of power. Tyler was accused of multiple illegal acts against her, and the suit also claimed he convinced her mother to grant him guardianship so he could legally travel out of state with her. Even worse, these claims were seemingly corroborated by passages from Tyler's own memoir. The lawsuit and allegations received fresh public scrutiny. Several Disney park fans called for the ride to be rethemed immediately, but Disney stayed silent throughout it all. Still though, rumors swirled about an eventual retheme. Less than 2 years later, it was announced that Aerosmith would be on its way out from the attraction's theme. Now, to be clear, there is no evidence that the Tyler scandal directly impacted the attraction. Keep in mind, the version at Disneyland Paris had already been rethemed before the news. It's possible that Disney was going to allow Aerosmith's contract to expire on its own. From a purely business standpoint, Disney likely felt it was better to not breach their contract and risk a legal battle with the band, choosing to just let the contract run out on its own. It's quite possible the timing was just a bad coincidence. As for what would replace the Aerosmith theme, it was announced that the Muppets would be moving into Studio C. The ride's name will soon be known as Roller Coaster Starring the Muppets. The coaster will feature the music of the Electric Mayhem, with the other Muppets making appearances in the experience. This announcement was also controversial, but not because people didn't like the Muppets, far from it. Many found the Aerosmith theme to be outdated, and some have pointed out the band members are now in their 70s, with Tyler soon to be turning 80. Plus, I'm sure many people would rather have a music-themed ride based on the Muppets than, say, Maroon 5 or Drake. No, the announcement of the new roller coaster was controversial because of another attraction it was replacing. Across the park, the Muppet Vision 3D show had operated for over 30 years. This 3D film featured animatronics and in-theater effects including bubbles, smoke, and water. On a side note, did anyone else think that Fozzie was urinating on the audience as a kid? Somehow I didn't notice the flower he was wearing. Now, in regards to Muppet Vision as a whole, there is something very important to point out. Many theme park attractions have sentimental value for various reasons, but this one was different. This was actually the last project Muppets creator Jim Henson worked on before his death in 1990. Henson actually passed away during its production, and many considered the attraction to be like a historical monument. That said, it was undeniable that the attraction was suffering from dwindling attendance over the years. Moreover, Disney hardly updated it in the multiple decades of its operation. Arguably, the final nail in the coffin came with the construction of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. In the park's old layout, Muppet Vision was more visible and easily accessible. However, Galaxy's Edge required major terrain work. In the end, the map was adjusted so guests could easily pass right by Muppet Vision on their way to the new land. It was essentially in a dead-end area of the park that you had to go out of your way to find. It was like something at Six Flags Great Adventure. And as if that weren't bad enough, a major visual marker was removed too. In the past, the Muppet Vision building had a large balloon with Kermit's face on it to let guests know where it was. This balloon, however, would have broken the immersion of the new Star Wars land, so it was taken down. This made the attraction practically invisible to guests passing by. Some argued this was a major failure in planning, while others suggested that Disney was setting the attraction up to fail. Still, others argued that a 30-year-old 3D movie just didn't have the same mass-market appeal that it used to, and that even if it weren't for the layout changes, it would have still struggled. Disney, in an effort to make sure the Muppets remained as a part of the park, will be incorporating them into the old Rockin' Roller Coaster. The former spot of Muppet Vision, meanwhile, will be taken over by a Monsters, Inc.-themed land. Towards the end of the coaster's run, the pre-show was disabled for unspecified reasons, being replaced with the logo of G-Force Records. Some suggested this was to prevent wannabe urban explorers or even cast members from stealing the props inside the recording room. It could also be because they already started work on the next pre-show, and this is just a construction wall. Regardless, final rides for the Aerosmith version were given on March 1st, 2026. Wait times were said to peak at around 135 minutes as people lined to ride it with the Aerosmith soundtrack one last time. As of right now, construction on the retheme is underway, with officials quickly taking down all references to Aerosmith. To sum it all up, Roller Coaster Starring Aerosmith leaves behind a complicated but undeniable legacy. It was one of Disney's boldest attractions, and I had a blast on this coaster as a kid. Regardless of its controversies, I looked forward to riding it every time I visited Disney World. To be honest, the Muppets are awesome, and I think the colorful chaos of the franchise will be a great fit for such an intense thrill ride. It's understandable that some feel that the Muppets is meant for general audiences, and that an ultra-intense thrill ride doesn't fit them. It's also understandable that people are worried that it will take the Avengers Assemble approach and be a cheap retheme. Now, I definitely don't want to see something like that. What we need is something like the original Paris coaster used to be, a colorful, psychedelic light show with wacky, zany imagery surrounding the track. Admittedly, Disney's theme park editions have been hit or miss in recent years, but I'd still like to give this new rendition a shot. I'll always have a soft spot for the Aerosmith version, but it doesn't hurt to have an open mind and accept change. Let's see how this coaster turns out when it opens later this year.
Now it's time for the comment shoutout program. This is where I take 5 random comments from my previous video and read them out.
These comments come from my video on Lost Media Dark Rides. Clay3613 says, "The lack of footage for MGM Grand Adventures has made me upset for over 15 years now." Joe Larry Productions says, "You got to talk about the Tintin-themed Secret of the Unicorn Dark Ride at Wallaby, Belgium. Only footage of the exterior and some photos of the interior of the ride seems to exist." Tyler Cuddletail says, "The last ride, Hellgate, feels pretty much like a very old version of a Hell House, but as a ride instead of a temporary dramatized walkthrough at an evangelical church during Halloween time." Overboss Zero says, "There's something morbidly amusing about the rides involving themes around hell being destroyed in a fire in the end. They had an omen and they didn't even know it." And Catherine Abernathy says, "Being this early feels like being in an empty mall."
If you want to see your words in my next video, leave a comment down below and it may be selected. Please note though that inflammatory or spam comments will not be read. Thank you all so much, and if you want to support me on Patreon, you can do so once again at the link in the description. Thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media on Instagram and Facebook, or you can check out my website at themeparkcrazy.com. And I'm on TikTok. This is Theme Park Crazy, and I'll see you all next time.